A chilly breeze swept through the station that morning. People hurried in and out, their shoes clicking on the marble floor, their voices mixing with the rumble of trains and the distant call of announcements. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old newspapers. Among the rush of travelers, a man stood quietly near the ticket machines watching the crowd. He looked ordinary. Gray coat, dark trousers, a wool cap pulled low. Nothing about him caught attention except maybe the calmness in his eyes, as if he wasn't rushing anywhere at all. He carried no briefcase, no phone in hand. Just a small folded piece of paper tucked into his coat pocket. To anyone else, he was just another commuter passing through. But in truth, he was someone very few would expect to see here like this. Behind that quiet face was a man whose name was known in high places, a man who owned businesses across the city, whose signature could move millions of dollars. Yet there he was, standing in a crowded station like any other person, blending in perfectly. He walked slowly toward the far end of the station where the noise of the crowd began to thin out. There, beside a coffee stall and a row of benches, stood an old upright piano. It had been placed there years ago as part of a city art project inviting anyone to play. Over time, the piano had grown dusty. A few keys were chipped. Some days it sat untouched from morning to night. Most people were too busy to notice it anymore. It was almost invisible, just another object in a place where everyone was always in a hurry. The man stood beside it for a long moment. He touched the edge of the piano as if greeting an old friend. His hand trembled slightly, not from the cold but from memory. He hadn't touched a piano in years. Once, long ago, before his life had become all about numbers and deadlines, he used to play every day. Music had been his escape, his language, his peace. But life had changed. Success came, and with it came pressure, expectations, and endless work. The piano was pushed aside, first to the corner of his house, then forgotten entirely. Now, after all those years, something had drawn him back. Maybe it was the loneliness that money could never fill. Maybe it was the memories that refused to fade. Or maybe it was the small note he carried in his pocket, written in delicate handwriting, a reminder of someone he once loved deeply. He looked around. No one seemed to care what he was doing. A couple sat eating sandwiches on a bench. A woman scrolled through her phone. A security guard leaned against the wall, half asleep. He took a slow breath and sat down on the worn wooden bench before the piano. The sound of it creaked under his weight. He lifted the lid carefully and ran his fingers across the keys, brushing off a thin layer of dust. Some of the keys were out of tune. He smiled softly. It didn't matter. For a moment, he simply sat there, hands resting on his lap, staring at the keys as if trying to remember how they once felt. The noise of the station faded into the background. All he could hear was the faint hum of the piano waiting for him. Then, with a deep breath, he placed his fingers on the keys and pressed the first note. It was hesitant, slightly off pitch, but it echoed beautifully through the hall. A few heads turned. He pressed another note, then another, forming a melody that began to take shape. His hands moved slowly at first, as if waking up from a long sleep. But soon the stiffness melted away and his fingers started to dance across the keys. The melody grew smoother, richer, filled with emotion that words could never express. A young boy who had been walking with his mother stopped near the piano. The mother tried to pull him along, but he tugged her hand and pointed toward the man. The mother paused. There was something in the music that made her stop too. It wasn't loud or showy. It was tender, filled with feeling, as if the man was talking through the piano instead of speaking. Nearby, a coffee vendor turned down the volume on his small radio. A woman waiting for her train put down her phone. The sound of the piano began to fill the open space, washing over everyone who passed. The melody carried warmth and sadness at the same time, the kind of sound that reaches deep inside, stirring old memories you didn't know you still carried. The man's face was calm, but his eyes glistened as he played. Each note pulled him back to another time. A small room, a single lamp, and a gentle voice urging him to keep playing, telling him that music was his heart speaking out loud. He remembered those nights when he and that voice shared dreams of the future, when they had nothing but a second-hand piano and a lot of hope. They believed that music could heal anything. He had promised never to stop playing. But promises are fragile when life changes faster than you can hold on. When success found him, it came at a cost. He spent years building his company, traveling between cities, meeting investors, attending events. The music faded slowly until one day he realized he couldn't remember the last time he touched a piano. The person who once inspired him was gone too, leaving behind an empty space that even wealth couldn't fill. Now, sitting at that public piano in the middle of a noisy station, all those years came rushing back. The melody flowed from his hands like tears he had never shed. It was gentle at first, then powerful, then gentle again, like the rhythm of a heartbeat trying to heal. The people who stopped to listen didn't know who he was or what his story was, but they felt something familiar, something human, something honest in every note he played. More people gathered. Some stood silently, others took out their phones to record. A man who had been rushing to catch a train slowed down and simply stood there, briefcase in hand, forgetting where he was supposed to be. A young girl with headphones took them off and smiled. Even the pigeons fluttering near the roof seemed to quiet down. The man didn't look up. His eyes stayed on the piano, lost in the world he had reopened. The station lights reflected softly on his face, showing lines that spoke of years of hard work and hidden grief. But in that moment, he didn't look like a businessman or a stranger. He looked like a man remembering what it meant to feel alive. He played for several minutes, unaware of the growing crowd. The melody rose higher, reaching its emotional peak before gently falling back into stillness. It was like watching someone pour his soul into the air. Every person standing there could sense it, that this wasn't just music. It was a confession, a memory, a love letter, all at once. When he finally lifted his hands from the keys, the last note lingered softly, echoing through the hall before fading into silence. For a second, no one moved. The station, usually so full of noise, was completely still. Then someone began to clap. The sound spread slow and hesitant at first, then stronger. The man looked up, surprised. His lips curved into a faint smile, humble and quiet. He nodded slightly as if thanking them, though his eyes still carried that faraway sadness. He closed the piano lid gently. The crowd continued to clap, but he didn't stay for attention. He stood up, gave a polite nod, and started to walk away. People watched him go, whispering to one another about how beautiful the music had been. A few tried to ask his name, but he simply smiled and kept walking, disappearing into the flow of the crowd. The coffee vendor called out, "Hey, sir, that was amazing." But the man was already too far to hear. He walked slowly through the exit, his steps light, as if a heavy weight had finally lifted off his shoulders. Outside, the city buzzed with its usual chaos. Cars honking, people talking, life moving on. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the cold air, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the small piece of paper he had been carrying. It was worn and creased from being held too many times. On it were a few handwritten words: "Play again when your heart is ready." He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. Maybe this was what she meant. Not to play for fame, not for perfection, but for healing. To let the music remind him that he was still human beneath all the success and distance. As he walked down the street, he passed a shop window displaying elegant watches. A group of businessmen inside were laughing, their voices muffled through the glass. He glanced at them briefly but didn't stop. He had been one of them for years, constantly checking time, running from one meeting to another, chasing achievements that never filled the emptiness inside. But today time didn't matter. For the first time in years, he felt alive without needing to prove anything. Back at the station, the piano sat quietly again, but something about it seemed different now, as if it carried a new kind of warmth. The people who had heard him play lingered for a while, talking softly. A few of them even took turns pressing a few keys, smiling at the sound. The music had left something behind, a shared silence that felt almost sacred. Later that evening, when the rush hour crowd returned, the story of the mysterious man at the piano began to spread. Someone uploaded a short video online. The caption read, "A stranger played this at the station today. It made me cry." Within hours, thousands of people watched it. No one knew who he was, but everyone felt the same thing, that rare, quiet beauty of genuine emotion. Some said he looked familiar, like someone they'd seen in a magazine once, but no one could be sure. The man himself was already home, sitting alone in his dimly lit living room. The sound of the piano still echoed in his mind. He sat by the window looking out at the city lights and felt something shift inside him. He wasn't sure if he'd play again tomorrow or next week, but he knew he wouldn't wait years again. For now, that one song, played on a dusty piano in a crowded station, was enough. It had brought him back to himself, and maybe, just maybe, it had reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes, even in the middle of chaos, a single melody can touch the deepest part of the human heart. The next morning, the city woke up as usual, rushing into its rhythm, horns blaring, phones ringing, and trains moving in and out like clockwork. But somewhere in that busy flow, something small but unusual had started to spread. People were talking about a mysterious man who had played the piano at the central station the day before. It began with a short video, only a minute long, filmed by a young woman who had happened to be waiting for her train. She had recorded the man's trembling hands, the way he played like someone remembering something precious, and how the final note hung in the air before the crowd clapped softly. She didn't know who he was, but the emotion in that clip was enough. By morning, the video had gone viral. Comments poured in. "Who is this man? I can't stop crying. This touched me more than any song I've heard lately. I wish I could thank him in person." People shared it again and again. Some said they recognized his face from somewhere but couldn't remember where. Others insisted he must be a street musician with a broken heart. A few even thought it was a staged performance. But no one knew the truth. That the man in that video was a quiet billionaire who had more money than he'd ever need, yet carried a sadness no wealth could erase. While the internet was busy guessing, the man himself sat in a small cafe across town, quietly stirring his coffee. He wore the same simple coat and cap, blending in easily. He had no idea his playing had reached millions. His phone was switched off. He wasn't avoiding the world, but he had grown tired of the noise it brought. He wanted peace, something that didn't come from power or success, something he couldn't buy. He looked out the window at the people passing by. Everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere, just like he used to. Always busy, always planning the next deal, the next meeting, the next goal. Somewhere along the way, he had forgotten how to simply be. The piano yesterday had reminded him of that. Of stillness, of emotion, of something pure. He finished his coffee and left a small tip on the table. The waiter thanked him politely, unaware that the quiet customer could have bought the entire cafe if he wanted. That's how he liked it. He had no interest in being seen as a tycoon anymore. Money had stopped exciting him a long time ago. What mattered now was something else, something he couldn't quite explain, but he felt it growing stronger since that moment at the piano. As he walked toward the station again, he noticed small details he hadn't paid attention to before. The way sunlight reflected on the windows, the laughter of two students passing by, the smell of roasted peanuts from a street cart. They were simple things, ordinary, yet they felt different now. Maybe that's what happens when your heart starts to wake up again. When he reached the station, the piano was still there, sitting quietly in its corner, the same one that had held his heart the day before. But this time it wasn't ignored. A small group of people stood near it, taking pictures and pointing at the bench. Someone had even placed a small bunch of flowers on top, wrapped in newspaper. A handwritten note rested beside them. It said, "To the man who made us cry, thank you for reminding us what real music sounds like." He stood there for a long while, watching. He felt a mix of surprise and warmth. He hadn't expected anyone to care. Yesterday he had played for himself, not to impress, not for attention, just to feel something real again. But somehow it had touched strangers. Maybe that's what music does. It carries emotions from one heart to another without asking for names or stories. He sat down on a bench nearby, blending into the background. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, walked up to the piano with her mother's encouragement. She placed her tiny hands on the keys and pressed them clumsily. The notes were off-key, but her face lit up. A few people clapped. The man smiled. He remembered his own first time touching a piano as a child. Back then, he had no teacher, no lessons, just curiosity. He had taught himself by listening, repeating melodies until his fingers remembered them. He had always loved how music could turn silence into something alive. As the little girl played, her mother turned around and noticed him watching. She smiled politely. He nodded back. There was a kindness in her eyes, the kind that comes from people who still notice the beauty in small things. The girl finished her short tune and giggled when people clapped. The man found himself clapping too, He didn't go to the piano that day. Instead, he just watched, listening to the random mix of melodies played by different people passing by. Some were good, some not so much, but all of them were sincere. The piano had come alive again, and that made him quietly happy. By afternoon, he walked out of the station and headed toward a park nearby. The leaves had started to change color, painting the trees in gold and rust. He sat on a bench and thought about how strange it was that one moment of music could ripple out like this. For years, he had invested in things meant to make life easier: technology, buildings, businesses. But he had never seen people moved like they were by that simple song. Maybe it was time to invest in something different. That evening, as he sat by his living room window, he opened his laptop for the first time that day. The first thing he saw was his own face on a video thumbnail. The title read, "Mysterious Man Brings Entire Station to Tears with His Piano Performance." He clicked on it. The video played, the shaky camera, the soft music, the way the crowd had gathered. Watching himself from the outside felt strange. He looked older than he thought he did. His coat seemed worn, his posture tired. But the music, it sounded real, painfully real. He scrolled through the comments. Thousands of them. Some said they had lost someone and his music made them cry. Some said it gave them hope. A few said they had gone to the station hoping to see him again. He read every comment slowly, his eyes stinging more than once. He didn't reply, didn't like or share anything. He simply sat back, letting it sink in. Maybe he had been invisible for too long, not to the world, but to himself. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. He made himself a cup of tea and sat quietly for a while. Then, without really deciding to, he went back to the station again. The same coat, the same cap. This time, there were even more people near the piano. Someone was already playing a gentle tune and others stood around listening. He didn't want to disturb them, so he sat at a distance. It was then that he noticed a small group of teenagers talking excitedly. One of them said, "He might come back today. I saw online someone said he lives nearby." Another laughed. "Yeah, right, why would a rich guy like him play a public piano?" He smiled quietly to himself. They had no idea. Maybe it was better that way. Hours passed and the crowd slowly thinned. The piano stood empty again. He hesitated, then finally walked over. This time when he sat down, people noticed right away. A few recognized his coat. Someone whispered, "It's him." He ignored the whispers and lifted the lid again. The keys felt cold under his fingers, but familiar. He took a deep breath and began to play a different tune, softer, lighter, like morning sunlight. The sound filled the hall, warm and calm. It wasn't as sad as yesterday. It carried something new. Hope. A small boy sitting cross-legged nearby closed his eyes and swayed to the rhythm. An old man stood silently, his hands folded. The melody wrapped around them like a gentle blanket. The man playing smiled faintly. He could feel the energy of the crowd, but it didn't pressure him. It comforted him. He wasn't alone anymore. When the song ended, people clapped again, louder this time. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" But he didn't stay for long. He stood, gave a little bow, and left quietly once more. Outside, a reporter who had been following the story managed to catch up to him. "Sir, are you the man from the video?" she asked kindly. "People are calling you the station pianist. Can we know your name?" He smiled gently. "No need for names," he said softly. "Just let the piano be the story." The reporter looked at him curiously. "But people want to know why you played. Was it for someone?" He paused for a long second, his gaze drifting toward the station behind them. "Maybe," he said finally. "Maybe for someone, and for everyone who forgot how to feel." Then he tipped his cap and walked away before she could ask more. That night, social media exploded again. The second performance was recorded too, and now people were even more curious. Some called him the undercover pianist. Others called him the man with the broken heart. The mystery only made the story more powerful. He stayed away from the noise, but deep inside he felt something changing. For years he had measured success by numbers, profits, awards, recognition. But now, he realized that the most valuable thing he had done in years was to sit at that dusty piano and play from his heart. He thought again about the note in his pocket, the one that said, "Play again when your heart is ready." Maybe this was what readiness looked like. Not perfection, not performance, just honesty. Before going to bed, he made one quiet decision. He would use his wealth differently now, not for more buildings or bigger companies, but to bring music back to people who needed it, the way it had come back to him. He didn't know yet how he would do it. But he knew he would start with that old piano at the station, the one that had reminded him and everyone else that sometimes the smallest melodies can heal the biggest wounds. The morning sun rose gently over the city, touching the rooftops with gold. The man sat by his window looking at the streets below. The world was already alive. Cars honking, people rushing, coffee shops opening their doors. He took a slow sip of tea, the warmth spreading through his chest. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace that had nothing to do with success or power. It came from something much simpler: music. On the table beside him lay an envelope with no name, just a simple note: for the city's music program. Inside it was a check large enough to buy dozens of pianos. He had decided last night that he wanted to do something meaningful, something that would last longer than money in a bank. The piano at the station had reminded him how powerful small moments could be. If one old piano could make strangers stop and feel something, what could happen if more were placed around the city? He folded the envelope neatly and slipped it into his coat pocket. He didn't plan to announce his name or make it public. He wanted it to be a quiet gift, from one person's heart to another's. Sometimes the most genuine things didn't need attention. They just needed to exist. Later that morning he went out, his steps light. The air was cool, carrying the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. He passed by familiar buildings, tall glass offices, fancy restaurants, and billboards advertising luxury watches. Once these things had been part of his daily life. He used to see them as symbols of achievement. Now they just looked like reflections of a man he used to be. When he reached the station, he noticed something unexpected. There was a small crowd gathered again near the piano. But this time he wasn't the one playing. A young man, maybe in his 20s, sat there, his fingers moving nervously over the keys. His tune was shaky at first, but soon it grew confident. He was playing from memory, just like the man once did when he was young. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was alive. The older man stopped a few steps away and listened quietly. The crowd clapped when the tune ended. The young man smiled shyly, clearly surprised by the attention. He got up quickly, ready to leave, but a woman from the crowd said, "Play one more." He laughed nervously and said, "I don't know many songs." She said, "Then play the one from yesterday, the one that made everyone cry." The young man hesitated. "I don't know if I can." "You can," said a voice behind him. The young man turned around. The older man stood there, his familiar coat slightly wrinkled, his calm eyes kind. The crowd immediately recognized him. Whispers spread fast. "It's him!" someone said softly. Cameras began to lift again, but he gently raised a hand. "Let's just listen," he said. He motioned for the young man to sit again. The younger one hesitated, but finally nodded. The older man leaned closer and whispered, "Don't worry about the crowd. Just play what you feel." The young man nodded again, took a deep breath, and placed his fingers on the keys. The first notes came slowly, uncertainly. The melody was the same one that had moved the entire station days ago. The same song the older man had played from his heart. But now it sounded different, new yet familiar. The crowd listened in silence, the melody carrying softly through the air. The older man closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. It was strange, hearing his own emotion reflected through someone else's hands. When the young man finished, the crowd clapped, their smiles genuine. He looked relieved and happy. The older man stepped forward and said quietly, "You played beautifully." The young man blushed a little. "I saw your video. I wanted to learn that song. It made me remember my dad. He used to play the piano too before he passed away." The older man's eyes softened. "Then keep playing for him," he said. "Play for the people who listen, even when you don't see them." The young man smiled and nodded. "I will." The crowd started clapping again. Someone shouted, "Play together." The two men looked at each other. The older one smiled faintly. "Why not?" They sat side by side. The young man started a light tune, and the older one joined softly, filling the spaces between the notes. The sound was magical. Two generations, two hearts speaking the same language. The station filled again with warmth and awe. Some people held their phones up, but most just stood there quietly, letting the music speak. When the song ended, the applause was louder than before. A few people even wiped away tears. The younger man turned to thank the older one, but he was already standing, ready to leave. "You did well," he said. "Keep the piano alive." Then he gave a gentle nod to the crowd and walked away, disappearing into the morning rush once more. That moment became another story, another video, another wave of emotion across the internet. People called it the duet that melted the city's heart. But the man didn't see it that way. For him, it was just a shared moment between strangers, proof that kindness and creativity still existed in a world that often forgot how to slow down. That evening, he sat on his balcony, looking at the lights of the city. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the streets below. He felt lighter than he had in years. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. All he needed was that sense of connection, that feeling of being part of something real again. A week later, his quiet donation reached the city council. They didn't know who it came from, only that it was meant to support public music spaces. The money was used to repair old pianos, place new ones in schools, and sponsor young musicians. Slowly, more and more pianos began to appear in parks, libraries, and train stations. People noticed. They started to play even if they didn't know how. Some played well, some barely at all, but it didn't matter. The city began to sound a little more human again. Meanwhile, the older man kept visiting the station every few days, always in the same coat, always quietly. Sometimes he'd play, sometimes he'd just listen. Each time he saw new faces. Children trying out simple tunes, elderly people humming along, travelers stopping just to smile. The piano had become something special, something that didn't belong to anyone but somehow belonged to everyone. One afternoon, as he sat nearby, a woman approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," she said. "You're the man from the videos, right?" He smiled politely. "Maybe," he said. She held out her phone. "I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter saw your video and started learning piano again. She said your music made her feel like anything was possible." He nodded slowly. "That's the best thing I could ever hear." Before she left, she said, "You've changed something here. The station feels different now." After she walked away, he thought about her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't just the music that changed things. Maybe it was what people remembered because of it. Music had reminded them that feelings weren't weaknesses. They were what made life meaningful. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how one act, sitting down and playing a forgotten piano, had started something much larger than he ever planned. He stood by the window watching the city lights flicker. The skyline looked sharp and cold, full of glass and steel, but somewhere below it all, warmth was spreading nervy in stations and parks, in people's hearts. The next morning, he visited a small school on the outskirts of town. It was one of the first places that had received a piano through his donation. The school wasn't fancy, cracked walls, faded paint, but the children's laughter filled the halls like music. When he entered the small music room, a group of kids were gathered around the piano, playing simple songs, giggling when they hit the wrong notes. He stood quietly at the door, watching. The teacher noticed him and asked kindly, "Can I help you?" "I was just passing by," he said with a smile. "It's wonderful to see the piano being used," the teacher nodded. "The kids love it. They take turns every day. It's made them more confident, happier even." He felt his chest tighten with emotion. "That's good," he said softly. "That's what music should do." Before he left, one of the children ran up to him and said, "Sir, do you play?" He smiled. "A little." The child grinned. "You should play something then." He hesitated for a moment, then walked to the piano. The kids gathered around, curious. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play a light, joyful tune. The children started clapping along, some even dancing. Their laughter echoed through the room. It was the purest sound he had heard in years. When he finished, the children clapped loudly. He felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You reminded me why I started playing in the first place." As he walked out of the school, the teacher stopped him and asked, "Who are you, sir?" He smiled, the same gentle smile he always carried. "Just someone who loves music," he said. He left before she could ask more. That evening, he passed by the station once more. The piano was being played by a young woman singing softly as she played. The crowd around her swayed gently. He stood in the corner, unseen, listening. He didn't need to sit at the piano anymore. It was alive on its own now, carrying his story without his name. The city that once only knew him for his business now unknowingly carried his music in its corners. Not through headlines, not through fame, but through feeling. And as he watched people smile, laugh and cry around that same old piano, he realized something simple yet profound, that sometimes the smallest act of honesty can create a wave of kindness bigger than any empire. He turned and walked away into the night, the soft echo of the piano following him like a heartbeat. Steady, alive and human, he kept his eyes fixed on the keys, lost between the present and a storm of memories that felt too heavy to hold. Every note he played brought back pieces of a life that seemed far away, almost like it belonged to someone else. The melody was soft, but there was pain inside it, the kind that could only come from love and loss woven together. To the people around him, he was just a stranger playing beautifully. But inside him, something old was being awakened, something he had kept buried for years. He remembered the small apartment where he first learned to play. Back then, life was simple. He had no business suits, no meetings, no deadlines, just a cheap keyboard and long nights filled with dreams. He used to play until sunrise, trying to capture feelings he didn't have words for. Music was his way of talking to the world. And then one day, someone had walked into that world and changed everything. She had heard him play in a small cafe. He was nervous then, unsure if he was good enough, unsure if anyone cared to listen. But she did. She had sat there quietly, eyes closed, smiling softly as if every note mattered. After that day, she never missed a performance. She used to tell him that his music made her feel at peace, like the world paused for a moment to breathe. He believed her. And in that belief, he found courage to dream bigger. But life has its own plans. As his music started to gain attention, he was offered chances, small contracts, better venues, and eventually, business opportunities that promised stability. He wanted to give her a good life, one without worry. He promised he would come back to music when things were secure. Just a few years, he had said. She had smiled and told him to follow his dreams, but her eyes had carried a quiet sadness, as if she knew what he didn't, that sometimes chasing success means losing yourself. The melody changed, flowing into a softer, sadder tune. He could almost hear her voice again, laughing in the kitchen, humming to his unfinished songs, waiting for him late at night when he came home from meetings. He had built a fortune, yes, but somewhere along the way, he forgot the man who once played music just to feel alive. When she fell ill, he was too busy flying across countries, closing deals and signing contracts. He thought he had time. He didn't. The day she was gone, the world went silent. The company he built, the house he owned, the cars, the power, none of it meant anything. The piano in their living room sat untouched for years. He couldn't bear to look at it. Music, once his greatest comfort, became a reminder of what he had lost. So he locked that part of himself away and became someone else, a man respected, admired, and yet completely empty inside. Back in the train station, his hands trembled slightly on the keys. The crowd didn't know his story, but they could feel the emotion pouring through his fingers. It wasn't a performance anymore, and it was a confession. Every note spoke words he had never said out loud. Regret, love, memory, forgiveness. The music told it all. People began to sense there was something deeper behind this man, something real and raw that touched them even if they didn't understand why. A young couple holding hands stood close, listening quietly. An old man leaned on his cane, eyes glistening. A mother rocked her baby gently, letting the rhythm soothe the child. Everyone in their own way felt something stir inside them. It was as if his pain had become theirs for a moment, and somehow that made them feel less alone. He didn't look up, not once. He didn't see the small crowd growing around him. All he saw in his mind was the small cafe where it had all begun. He could almost smell the coffee, hear the chatter of a few people, and see her sitting there. Same soft smile, same patient eyes. He wished he could tell her how much he missed her. He wished he had played for her one last time. Maybe that's why he was playing now, to finally say what he couldn't before. The melody picked up again, shifting from sorrow to something hopeful. The crowd noticed the change. The sadness in the notes began to fade, replaced by a gentle strength. His fingers moved with confidence now, like a man rediscovering his purpose. He wasn't just mourning anymore, he was healing. The years of silence were melting away with every chord. He could feel his chest lighten, as if the music was washing the dust off an old soul. For the first time in a long while, he smiled faintly. It was small but real. He didn't care that his coat was old, that his shoes were scuffed, that no one knew who he really was. In this moment, he was free. He wasn't the tycoon who owned buildings or sat in boardrooms. He was just a man playing the piano in a crowded station, surrounded by strangers who somehow understood him without a single word. The song flowed like a story, starting in darkness, climbing through pain and ending in peace. Some people started recording with their phones, wanting to capture the moment. But even through their screens, they could feel it wasn't just music. It was emotion turned into sound. A man sharing his soul without needing to explain why. A teenager standing nearby whispered to his friend, "He's really good." His friend nodded, but neither of them moved. They couldn't look away. There was something about the way the man played, as if he was teaching them something about life without speaking a word. As the music continued, the memories came and went like waves. The good times, the laughter, the quiet nights when the world felt still. He thought about all the people who come and go in life, about how easily we take moments for granted. He realized that love isn't about grand gestures or promises. It's about being there, truly being there, when it matters. And maybe this was his way of being there now, even if she was gone. The keys grew softer, slower. The melody reached its final part, the one he had written long ago but never finished. He used to say he'd complete it when he found the right ending. Maybe this was it. Maybe playing here among ordinary people was exactly how it was meant to end. No stage, no fame, no spotlight, just honesty. He felt a tear slide down his cheek, but he didn't stop. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was relief. For years, he had hidden behind his wealth, thinking that success would protect him from pain. But pain doesn't care how much money you have. It finds everyone. And so does beauty. Sometimes, beauty hides in the simplest places: a forgotten piano, a stranger's smile, or a melody that carries someone's story. A small child clapped softly when the song paused, and others followed. He didn't even realize the music had ended. He kept his hands on the keys, listening to the echo fade into silence. The sound seemed to linger longer than usual, as if the walls themselves didn't want it to end. The crowd stayed quiet for a moment before gentle applause filled the air. It wasn't loud or rushed, and it was sincere, full of gratitude. He finally looked up. Faces of strangers met his eyes, but in their expressions he saw something familiar: kindness, connection, humanity. He gave a small nod, his lips forming a quiet thank you. He didn't need words. The music had already said everything. As he stood, a young woman stepped forward and said softly, "That was beautiful." He smiled and replied, "It's just a song I once promised to finish." She looked puzzled but smiled back. He didn't stay long. He didn't wait for recognition or questions. He closed the piano lid gently, as if tucking the story back inside it, and walked away. But this time he walked lighter, freer than he had in years. The people watched him leave, still unsure who he was. To them, he was just a stranger who had given them a moment they wouldn't forget. To him, they were the witnesses to a part of himself he thought he had lost forever. As he disappeared into the crowd, the station slowly returned to its usual noise. Trains arriving, people rushing, announcements echoing. But for those who had heard him play, the sound of that melody stayed. It followed them out of the station and into their day, reminding them that everyone carries a story, and sometimes a stranger's song can tell yours too. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, a small lamp lighting the room. For years, he had kept her photograph on the piano but never looked at it. Now he did. He placed his hand on it and whispered, "I played it for you." Outside, the city lights flickered, and for a moment, it felt like she was there, listening, smiling, at peace. And so, in the heart of a noisy city, a man rediscovered his music. Not for the world, but for himself. The sound had come from pain, but it had turned into something pure, something real, something human. The morning light slipped through the curtains and touched the man's face. He opened his eyes slowly, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't known in years. The city outside was already alive and distant. Horns, footsteps, and faint chatter blending into a familiar hum. He sat up and took a deep breath. For once, he wasn't rushing anywhere. There was no meeting, no contract waiting. His life had started to move at a different rhythm now, slower, softer, more meaningful. He walked toward the small wooden piano in the corner of the room. It wasn't grand or expensive, but it meant more to him than anything he had ever owned. It reminded him of where he came from, of who he truly was before the world pulled him into its noise. He pressed a single key and the note rang out clear and honest. It filled the quiet room, echoing gently. He smiled faintly. It felt like the beginning of something new. He poured himself some tea, then sat by the window watching people on the street below. Everyone looked busy, moving fast, chasing something unseen. He used to be one of them, always running after success, always afraid of stopping. But that day in the station had changed everything. The way people had listened, the way their faces softened when they heard his music. It reminded him that life wasn't about running, it was about feeling. He hadn't touched his business world in months now. His manager still handled things, but he had stepped back quietly, choosing peace over power. The news had moved on. People had forgotten about the mystery pianist, and that was how he liked it. But every few days he went back to that same train station, not to play, at least not always. Sometimes he just sat nearby watching others play, watching how strangers connected through a few notes on an old piano. It amazed him how something so simple could bring people together. Once he saw an old man teaching a small boy to play. The boy laughed every time he hit the wrong note, and the old man laughed with him. On another day, he saw a young woman singing while someone else played along. Crowds gathered, smiled, clapped. The station that was once filled only with noise and hurry now had moments of warmth and joy. The piano had become a part of people's daily lives, a small reminder that beauty could exist even in ordinary places. One afternoon, as he sat on a bench with his cup of coffee, a teenage boy approached him. The boy looked nervous but determined. "Excuse me, sir," he said softly. "Are you the man who played that song here a while ago?" The man looked up, surprised. He hadn't been recognized in months. "Why do you ask?" he said with a gentle smile. The boy held out his phone. On the screen was a short video of him at the piano, the one that had gone viral before he disappeared. "That's you, right?" He paused, then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said simply. The boy's eyes lit up. "I knew it," he said. "I've been learning piano because of you. I wanted to thank you. That song, it helped me through a hard time." The man looked at him kindly. "I'm glad to hear that. Keep playing. Music will always be there for you, even when nothing else is." The boy smiled, nodded, and left. The man watched him go, feeling something warm in his chest. That single moment made everything worth it. All the silence, all the reflection, all the time he had spent rebuilding himself. He had once measured success in numbers and awards. Now it was in smiles like that. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, he walked back home. The streets glowed with soft golden light. He passed by a small bakery and stopped when he heard faint piano music coming from inside. Curious, he peeked through the window. Inside, a young girl sat at an upright piano near the counter, her fingers carefully finding each key. The tune was familiar. It was the same melody he had played at the station. He opened the door quietly and stepped inside. The baker, a middle-aged woman, greeted him with a nod. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, nodding toward the girl. "She practices every evening after school. Says she learned it from a video she saw online." He smiled softly. "She plays it well," he said. The baker lowered her voice. "That video, it's of you, isn't it?" He hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "It doesn't matter who played it first. What matters is that she's playing it now." The woman smiled in return. "You're right. She's happier now because of it." He bought a small loaf of bread, left quietly, and kept walking. Outside, he could still hear the faint melody drifting through the open door. It made him realize something. When you put kindness into the world, it has a way of coming back, often through people you've never met. That night, he sat at his window again, watching the stars. For the first time, he didn't feel alone. His music was out there, living its own life. People were playing it, feeling it, sharing it. He didn't own it anymore, and that was beautiful. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. A man from the city's cultural department reached out. They wanted to organize a small community event, a music for all day where anyone could come and play at public pianos placed across the city. The man's donation had started the program months earlier, though no one knew it came from him. Now they wanted to celebrate what it had become. He hesitated at first. He didn't want attention or fame, but when they said it would inspire children and bring communities together, he couldn't say no. He agreed to help quietly from the background. He suggested the idea of inviting local musicians, school choirs, and street performers to take part. It wasn't about skill. It was about sharing something real. The day of the event arrived. The city was alive with sound, music on every corner, laughter in every park. He walked through the crowds unnoticed, just another face in the sea of people. Children played small keyboards, teenagers strummed guitars, old friends sang songs they hadn't sung in years. It was messy, imperfect, and beautiful. When he reached the train station, he stopped. The same piano stood there, polished now, decorated with flowers. A sign beside it read, "For everyone who believes in the power of music." Crowds had gathered again, but this time it wasn't just for one player. Dozens of people took turns, a young boy playing a simple tune, an old woman singing softly, a man with a harmonica joining in. He sat on a bench and watched, smiling quietly. This was what he had hoped for. Not applause, not attention, but connection. People were talking, laughing, living in the moment. The station felt alive in a new way. Then something happened that took him by surprise. A young woman holding a small microphone stood near the piano. She looked nervous but excited. "Before we play the last song," she said, "we want to dedicate it to the man who started all of this. We don't know his name, but his music brought this city together." He froze. The woman smiled and said, "We're going to play his song, the one that started it all." A hush fell over the crowd. Then slowly the familiar melody began, soft, gentle, full of heart. Different people took turns at the piano, each adding their touch. The sound grew richer, fuller, until it filled the entire station. He closed his eyes, feeling the music rise and fall like waves. It was no longer his song. It belonged to everyone now. Tears welled in his eyes, but they weren't from sadness. It was joy, quiet, deep joy. The kind that comes from seeing something you love live beyond you. The song ended and the crowd clapped, not for fame or skill, but for the feeling they shared. He stood up slowly and walked away, blending into the crowd. As he reached the exit, he turned one last time to look at the piano. The lights reflected off its polished surface, and for a brief second, he thought he saw her there, the woman he once loved, smiling at him through the glow. Maybe she had never really left. Maybe she had been with him in every note, every echo, every small act of kindness that followed. Outside, the evening sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. The city lights flickered to life one by one. He walked along the street, feeling a quiet sense of purpose. Life, he realized, isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how deeply you touch others. He stopped near a street corner where a small boy was trying to play a cheap keyboard. The boy looked up shyly and said, "Do you know how to play?" The man smiled. "A little," he said. The boy slid over, offering him space. He sat down beside him, pressed a few keys, and together they began to play. A simple tune, a joyful one. People passing by slowed down, smiled, and listened. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was full of life. When they finished, the boy grinned and said, "That was fun." He laughed softly. "Yes," he said. "It always is." As he walked away, he felt lighter than ever. Somewhere inside, he knew that his story, the real one, was still being written, not in headlines or wealth, but in moments like these. Moments that reminded people to listen, to feel, to remember that life isn't about being seen. It's about being heard. And so the man who once hid behind power had become something much simpler, a quiet soul who let music speak for him. He didn't need recognition. The melody was enough. It was alive in others now, carried through their laughter, their hope, and their love. And maybe that was all he ever needed, to know that his music would never fade, because it now belonged to the world. The city was quiet that morning. The sun rose slowly, brushing gold across the buildings while people began another day of rushing to work and chasing schedules. But for him it was different now. He had learned to wake up early, not to check emails or plan meetings, but to listen, to the sound of the city, the rhythm of footsteps, the heartbeat of ordinary life. Every sound felt like music in its own way. It reminded him that beauty didn't always come from perfection. Sometimes it came from the simple things we forget to notice. He made himself a cup of tea and walked out to the small balcony of his apartment. From there he could see the train station in the distance, the same one where everything had begun. It had been months since that day when he played at the public piano, and yet the memory still felt fresh, like a melody that never really stopped playing. He thought about all that had changed since then. His company was still running, stronger than ever, but now he was no longer trapped inside its walls. He still helped with decisions and guided people, but he didn't chase numbers anymore. He let his managers handle the rest. He had found something far more valuable: peace. And in that peace he had found himself again. He walked back inside and opened the lid of his piano. The keys looked worn from use, but he loved them that way. They held the marks of his rediscovered purpose. He began to play softly. Nothing complicated, just a slow tune that matched the quiet of the morning. The sound filled the room, warm and gentle. It was no longer about proving anything. It was simply about being present, about feeling alive. When the song ended, he sat for a while in silence. He thought about her, the one who had believed in him when he was young and uncertain, the one whose smile had been his first audience. He whispered a quiet thank you. Maybe she couldn't hear it, but deep down he believed that somehow she could feel it. Later that day, he decided to visit the train station again. It had become almost a ritual now, not to play, but just to watch. He liked sitting there with a cup of coffee, watching strangers pass by, hearing fragments of stories in their laughter and their tired sighs. The piano still stood in its corner, beautifully maintained. People came and went, playing songs for fun, for love, or for comfort. He noticed a small crowd gathered around it again, just like before. A young woman was playing. Her fingers moved nervously at first, but soon found their rhythm. The tune was familiar, his tune. He smiled softly as he realized she was playing the song that had changed everything. The crowd listened quietly, swaying slightly to the music. He watched her finish with trembling hands and shy eyes as people clapped and cheered. It warmed his heart. When she stood up, she caught his gaze. For a moment, she looked at him curiously, as if something about him felt familiar. Then she smiled and said, "Thank you for listening." He smiled back. "Thank you for playing," he said. She laughed softly and said, "This piano, it makes me feel something I can't explain. It's like the keys carry stories." He nodded. "Maybe they do," he said. "Maybe every note carries a memory." She thought about it for a second, then nodded. "Maybe you're right." After she left, he sat quietly on the same bench where it had all started. The memory of that first day came flooding back. The dust on the keys, the curious stares, the moment the crowd had gone silent. It felt like another lifetime now. Back then, he had been lost, trying to find something to fill an emptiness inside him. But he didn't realize that emptiness wasn't a curse. It was an invitation, an opening for something real to enter. And that day it had. He sat there until the crowd thinned. A few people still passed by, some humming the melody the young woman had just played. It amazed him how music could connect people who had never even met. It was like a quiet thread that tied lives together in invisible ways. As he got up to leave, he noticed a little boy standing near the piano, looking uncertain. The boy's mother was sitting on a bench nearby, encouraging him to go ahead. The boy hesitated, then reached up and pressed a single key. The sound made him giggle. He pressed another one, then another. Soon he was laughing, making random sounds that somehow formed their own kind of song. The man couldn't help but smile. He walked over and knelt beside him. "Would you like some help?" he asked kindly. The boy nodded shyly. He sat beside the child and showed him how to press a few keys together to make a soft chord. The boy's eyes widened. "That sounds pretty," he said. "It does," the man replied. "You see, every key has its own voice, but when you let them speak together, that's when the magic happens." The boy grinned and tried again. A small, uneven melody filled the air, but it was beautiful because it was real. The man clapped softly when the boy finished, and others nearby smiled too. As he stood up to leave, the boy's mother thanked him warmly. "He's been too shy to try before." "You gave him courage," he smiled. "Music belongs to everyone," he said. He just found his way to it. He walked away quietly, but his heart felt full. These moments, small, fleeting, but deeply human, had become his new purpose. They reminded him that life's greatest rewards weren't earned through wealth or status. They were found in connection, in sharing something honest, something that touches others in ways words never could. Weeks passed and seasons began to change. The air turned cooler, and leaves painted the city streets in colors of gold and red. He still visited the piano often, but now it wasn't to relive the past. It was to celebrate the present. Sometimes he would leave small notes on the piano, handwritten messages like, "Play something that makes you smile," or "Music is a conversation with your heart." People loved them. They took pictures, shared them online, and left their own messages in return. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a place of kindness, connection, and hope. One morning, a reporter tracked him down, not for a business interview, but for the story of the mystery pianist who had changed the city's mood. He agreed to meet her at a quiet cafe. When she asked him why he played that day, he smiled and took a sip of his coffee before answering. "I didn't plan it," he said softly. "I just felt something calling me back. I spent years building things, buildings, companies, systems, but I forgot to build peace inside myself. That day I found it again." The reporter leaned forward. "And what would you say your music means now?" He thought for a moment. "It means honesty. It means letting go. It means remembering that we're all the same, no matter who we are or what we have. Music doesn't care about status, it only cares about truth." The reporter smiled. "That's beautiful," she said. "People are going to love hearing that." He shook his head gently. "Let them love the music, not me." That's enough. The interview was short, but it spread quickly. People were moved by his words. They began to see him not as a businessman, but as a man who rediscovered his soul through something simple and pure. But he didn't seek fame or attention. He continued to live quietly, spending his days helping fund small music programs for children, supporting street musicians, and donating instruments to schools that couldn't afford them. Months later, at a charity event for music education, someone asked if he would perform again. The room fell silent, everyone waiting. He smiled humbly and said, "Only if you promise to sing along." Laughter filled the room, and soon he was sitting at a piano once more, surrounded by children, teachers, and families. He began to play the same song that had changed his life. The melody carried across the room, simple and tender. This time voices joined in, soft at first, then stronger. It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It was human. When the final note faded, he looked around the room, faces smiling, eyes shining, hearts full. He realized this was what he had been searching for all along. Not applause, not success, but this. A shared moment of genuine emotion. Later that night, when he returned home, he stood by his piano one last time. The city lights flickered outside the window. He placed his hands on the keys and whispered quietly, "Thank you for bringing me back." Then he played a final song, not for anyone else, but for himself. A song of peace, gratitude, and love. The notes drifted softly into the night, fading into the hum of the city. The same city that had once watched him sit at a public piano and pour his heart out. And though the moment had passed, the memory would live on, not just in videos or stories, but in the hearts of those who had felt it. Because sometimes, all it takes is one melody to remind people that beneath all the noise and hurry, we are all the same, human, fragile, and beautifully connected. And so, the man who once hid behind power became something far greater, a quiet reminder that kindness, art, and emotion are the true measures of wealth. And even years later, people who passed through that station would stop, play the old piano, and whisper to each other, "This is where it all began."